Hello, folks. It's that time of year again. Halloween is at our doorsteps. So I thought I'd share a few more spooky and strange experiences with you, sent to me by our listeners. So as the night progresses and the candles begin to burn out, make sure you're home before midnight, for a whole new month of strangeness awaits, like a creature in the night, hoping for a treat of its own. So here you go. Story 1. A few autumns ago, I was visiting Rock Creek Station Historical Park on my way through Nebraska. It's a beautiful park encompassing prairie hilltops, hiking trails, camping, and so on. But I was there for the history, as the park once served as a station for the Pony Express in the mid-1800s. Being this, the park will occasionally host living history reenactments, showing what life was like in the early days. Well, over the course of that day, I watched historians showcase their pioneering experiences, everything from working the land to wagon rides. But during one of those wagon demonstrations, one of the horses broke loose and began running amok around the property. As spectators watched in awe, the park employees did everything they could to try and control the horse, which had now gotten out of their reach. For reasons unknown, the large white horse had panicked and was now indiscriminately running at onlookers, nearly knocking them down, and then she headed straight for me. Luckily, there was an old blacksmith shop nearby that I ducked into just in time to avoid being stampeded. As I watched the large beast gallop on by, I noticed something really strange. I saw an outline of a man on the back of that horse. If I had to specify, it was like 95% air, but that other 5% revealed itself as what looked like to me a Native American warrior. And in that outline, I could make out a muscular body, marked with paint and partially covered by furs. He was holding something in his left hand, and I didn't quite see what this something was, but I assumed it was a weapon of some sort. But soon after seeing this, maybe just a few seconds of it, the horse ran out of sight and disappeared around some other buildings. Immediately, I ran over to the group of reenactors and asked them if they had seen what I just saw. They all looked at me like I was crazy and continued their pursuit of the horse. But then an older fella approached me and said, quote, "You saw it too, didn't ya?" I was shocked. He too confirmed what I had seen. A Native American warrior had rode on the back of that horse. If that wasn't strange enough, the man and myself were the only two people who seemed to have noticed it out of the hundreds of onlookers gathered around during that incident. Well, later on that day, long after I'd left the park, I noticed something else. Both myself and the older fella who saw the ghost have Pawnee Indian in our blood. Coincidence or not, I thought that was worth sharing. Story 2. Every Halloween, I like to set up a haunted forest for the kids on our street, as they get a kick out of it, as do I and my wife. I live out near Medford, Oregon, and in a fairly remote neighborhood away from the city. We have a nice 5-acre plot of forested land to play on. Well, about a week before Halloween of 2016, I began setting up the decorations, much like that of a typical haunted house, but just out in the woods instead. I go all out, too, as dozens of kids and their parents look forward to it every season. I'd been doing it for several years now. The haunted forest starts in a small meadow decorated by fake cemeteries and spooky pop-ups. After the meadow, the spectators would move down a narrow, rough-beaten path into thick woods, where more pop-ups would be waiting to greet them. After about 10 minutes of this, they arrive at another clearing, where the grand finale awaits them. A 10-foot animatronic Grim Reaper that my buddy and I constructed a few years back. Even for me, the damn thing is just plain terrifying. In fact, last year, one of the kids kinda freaked out after seeing it and needed some therapy. He's alright now, but that just goes to show you the effect this thing has on folks. Fast forward to Halloween Day, and the first group shows up to visit the haunted forest. 2 adults and 6 kids enter the attraction and begin their journey. As they did so, my wife and I sat on the porch and chuckled as we could hear the joyful screams and laughs as they reacted to the jump scares from the pop-ups. Once they entered the woods, I couldn't hear them much anymore, but was pretty confident they'd return impressed and full of laughter. About 15 minutes later, the group returned, seemingly in a hurry to get out of there. They weren't laughing. They weren't smiling either. Instead, their faces plastered with fear. One of the parents broke from the group and walked towards me. I can see he wasn't amused. Before I even had the chance to ask what had happened, he threw a right hook into my jaw, knocking me out of the chair, leaving me completely dazed. My wife jumped to my defense, and I told her to sit back down and relax, as I wanted to be level-headed and civilized about whatever the issue was. The parent just stood there, huffing and puffing before he spoke. Quote, "I don't appreciate what you did. You're a complete sicko, and we're never coming back." When asked what he was talking about, he turned and escorted the others back into their cars. I then noticed some of the kids were tearing up, completely traumatized. Before they left the driveway, the man rolled down his window and asked me what in the hell I was thinking. He left before I could respond. My wife and I looked at each other, completely perplexed by what had just happened. My jaw was throbbing with pain, but I needed to go see what it was that made them react this way. At first I thought maybe it was their reaction to the 10-foot prop, but they had seen it before and they loved it, except for the kid who needed therapy. But something told me that something else was responsible for frightening them. Soon thereafter, I retrieved my pistol, and my wife and I entered the haunted forest ourselves. We passed the cemetery and entered the trail. Nothing looked out of place, and all the props hadn't been disturbed. So we proceeded to the very end of it, and into the clearing, where I'd set up the Grim Reaper behind a large tree, so that anyone walking by would activate it, as it was motion censored. But as we neared the tree, my wife stopped me dead in my tracks, and told me to look up. I followed her gaze to a spot about 30 feet above the prop, and gasped when I saw it. Something had placed a dead deer upside down and left it hanging there. I don't mean to get graphic, but the body had been skinned, with some of its organs lying in a heap on the earth below it. It had been done with precision, the cleanest skinning job I had ever seen, even better than my hunting buddies. But what was really odd was that whatever had done this removed the eyes from the skull, and tied its hind legs into a knot, which is what kept it from falling. It was at this point I noticed something quite unnerving. There was another figure at the base of that tree, and here's how I describe it. It had a shimmering quality to it, like it was superimposed over the forest behind it. It was large, muscular in definition, hairless, and it moved slowly as if it were performing a slow dance maneuver, and then it positioned itself to face directly at my wife and I. I remember her clenching my arm tightly, and I could feel her body shaking with fear. The figure then rose up quickly and began moving straight for us. But there was no time to run, as the creature was really only about 30 yards away. But as I went to draw my gun from its holster, something startled the figure as it moved by the tree. In a twist I can only describe as miraculous, that 10-foot Grim Reaper prop came to life. Its red eyes flared, and its jaw lowered to reveal a hellish set of teeth, followed by a near-piercing demonic scream. And by the grace of God, the figure had accidentally activated the prop as it walked by it. Completely surprised by the sight, the figure took a step back and studied the prop. But the Grim Reaper wasn't done yet. Next, it thrusted its giant skeletal arms upward and screamed again, causing the figure to completely dissolve into the forest. That's how I would describe it, the way it disappeared. It just dissolved. Then all was quiet. Both my wife and I used the opportunity to get the hell out of there, as we were frightened that thing would return once it realized the prop was not a real threat. A few minutes later, we made it back to the house, where we would barricade ourselves inside. We called authorities and told them what had happened. Unfortunately, they were convinced we had seen a lion, but they did go out into the forest to investigate the incident. After they cleared the area, they returned with some bizarre news. Apparently, the dead deer was now gone, and they found tiny pieces of our Grim Reaper prop scattered all over the woods. It was clear that whatever this thing was had actually returned to finish the job. Well, a few days later, I enlisted my hunting buddies to help me collect the remaining props, as I would not be caught wandering around those woods alone after that incident. Eventually, I told my experience to the upset parent, and he eventually apologized and felt bad for what he had done to me. To this day, though, we can still find pieces of our beloved Reaper all over the property. Thank you for sharing my life-changing experience. Story 3. Every season, I spend a weekend camping out in Yellowstone, an annual tradition since '96. At around 7,800 feet in elevation, I dropped anchor at Bay Bridge Campground, which offers a sobering view of Yellowstone Lake, one of the highest and largest freshwater lakes in the U.S. Well, during my weekend there, I had a few really strange things happen. One morning I was having coffee. I saw something bizarre in the reflection of my cup. As I went to take a sip, I saw a metallic disc hovering over my head, and when I peered up into the beaming blue sky, it was gone. I saw it again when I looked back down. It just loomed overhead, maybe about 100 feet or so, and then I watched it slide right out of sight. On a different day, I returned to my tent to find a bison inside. I know that was my reaction too, I always leave my tent closed, so you can imagine my reaction when I returned to find it still closed with the large animal barely stuffed inside. I mean, I suppose someone could have trapped it inside as a prank, but I was pretty much the only one in that section of campground, and it just seems like a monumental effort to pull off a simple little prank in such a big way. Besides, I had only been gone for just 15 minutes. It just doesn't quite add up. The other strange thing to happen was when a group of government armed agents emerged from the tree line near my campsite and asked me how my day was going before walking back into the trees. A group of around 8 guys in tactical gear carrying an array of weapons just appeared, then disappeared within minutes, and they didn't want to arouse any suspicion, which I'm guessing is why they asked me that, and I just assumed they were with the government and a crime had been committed. I've been going to the park for a long while now, and nothing weird has happened until last autumn. Just wanted to share these weird experiences with you. Story 4. I'm a manager for a multi-million-dollar development firm. Basically, we go in, clear house, and build. Our next project was a big one, a 48-unit upscale condominium complex with 3 Olympic-sized pools, a gym, and 10 acres of recreational parkland. But first, we had to clear about 50 acres of forest in a remote part of Washington state. I can't exactly reveal the location, unless of course I want to get sued or lose my position with the firm. But what was supposed to be a smooth and simple process ended up being straight up turbulent, resulting in delays, red tape, and litigation. The first week of construction was met with a whole array of issues. Right out the gate, we were given the wrong blueprints for the project. Half the construction workers couldn't negotiate terms of their contract, and it turned out the land we were on belonged to the Spokane people, native to the area. This caused an 8-week delay in operations, but eventually we purchased an adjacent piece of land to get the ball rolling again, and so we did. About 2 weeks into the new build, one of our laborers disappeared in the middle of the workday, leaving everything behind. Surveyors would eventually find his clothes deep inside the surrounding woods, and we're all still pretty baffled by it. On another occasion, we arrived one morning to find blood smear and strange rock formations all over the worksite. It was quite the mess, and took us the entire day to clean it up. We then fenced off the entire perimeter, as it was obvious someone didn't want us to build there. Soon after that, some of our workers started seeing what they would describe as apparitions appearing to them at random times of the day, causing some of them to leave the job altogether. The project would again be delayed another 4 weeks after a series of relentless storms that battered the region, bringing with it floods and winds of up to 75 miles per hour. Of course, it was impossible to build under those conditions. The cost of these storms was phenomenal and nearly put a stop to the project. But that wasn't the worst part. Just as we were cleaning up and moving forward again, we came across a huge pest problem. Out of nowhere, men were getting stung by wasps and finding ticks all over their bodies. This would be the beginning of the end of the project, as the workers began turning in their papers one by one. And I can't say I blamed them. After much debate and consideration, we pulled the plug on operations and went our separate ways. All that time, money, and effort was wasted. This was one of the biggest failures in my career. I don't really get superstitious, but this really got me thinking that maybe there were unseen forces at play here. One thing's for sure, we weren't meant to build anything on that land. Story 5. I live in Washington State, and about 35 miles away from Mount Rainier as the crow flies. So I visit the park every opportunity I get. I've probably been to Rainier about a dozen times over the last 5 years, and I've hit just about every trail the park has to offer. It's a stunning place to visit, but I'd be lying if I said it doesn't creep me out from time to time. Well, on 3 separate occasions, I came across something that continues to bother me to this day, simply because there isn't really a logical explanation to be made from it. The first time I saw the strange sight was halfway up Tolmy Peak in 2016, and the other 2 times it happened was in Paradise Park and at the top of Sunrise Rim, both in 2018 and 2020. On each occasion, I stumbled across a heap of clothing directly in the middle of the trail. And when I took a closer look at the piles, there were personal belongings mixed in with the clothing, like jewelry, keys, pepper spray, and pretty much anything anybody would have on their person at any given time. But what really intrigued me was the way the heap was layered. Everything was where you would expect it to be, like if you had vanished into thin air, and everything you had on you collapsed directly onto the trail. Socks were still in their boots, underwear inside the jeans, and so on. The sight was so unnerving that I gathered up those belongings to give them to park officials when I returned from my hike, just in case anybody might be missing. They too found it strange, and had mentioned that I was not the only hiker to report these kinds of findings, and that several others have come forward with the same experiences. Of course, I did my best to describe the locations to park staff, so that they too could follow up on any missing person cases that might be connected to those items. I've never really taken the time to follow up on this, but a part of me is curious if they are tied to any missing people on that mountain. I mean, I really can't think of any other explanation to describe these findings, other than someone pulling a prank or messing with park visitors. But why way out here in the middle of nowhere like this? Baffling. I appreciate you taking the time to share these strange experiences, and I would like to hear from others who may have also encountered similar situations. And there you have it. I sure hope you're all having a pleasant Halloween. Whether you're out and about in costume or just in for the night watching a scary movie. Be safe out there, and you'll hear from me soon. Good night.